Welcome to the Early Founder Podcast. My name is Philip and I run a high school startup incubator called Launchpad, where I lead high schoolers nationwide through the startup process with the help of industry veterans. Along this journey, I was curious to see what makes an entrepreneur successful, what traits, experiences, and habits they possess, especially while they're young. So that's why I made the Early Founder, to have conversations with those who have made massive breakthroughs at a young age and to share their experiences with other aspiring founders. Today's guest is Eric Zhu, a 17-year-old entrepreneur and founder of Aviato, a private market data analytics platform that has raised $2.3 million from investors like 8VC and Soma Capital. He started his entrepreneurial journey at 13 by launching eSocial, a digital platform for schools which was acquired in 10 months, and co-founding Bakmonity Capital, a $20 million early-stage fund. Known for taking investor calls from his high school bathroom, Eric has built a strong personal brand through viral memes on Twitter, using humor to connect with the startup world. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. You had a lot of my friends on, right? So it was definitely pretty fun. I think, I heard. So I was ever dropping the ball in the first time, but I heard Zach was on. Zach's my roommate, so it's definitely pretty
That's
fun.
great.
So.
Yeah. I mean, this is our second time talking. You were once a guest speaker for Launchpad, which I'm very appreciative for. So my first question is, where does your company Aviato stand today? And what milestone are you most proud of so far?
Right now, we're just growing a team. I guess for context, we build private market data models. So what that means is we have a lot of data on people and companies. So for example, we could look at someone on the street and be able to tell exactly what their political association is, how much they make, what their comp structure is, their emails, their contacts, right, so on and so forth. So we provide a lot of this massive people and company data sets. And we work with a lot of really big companies out there. So we provide the backends of data for a lot of companies that you kind of see out there, like from recruiting tools all the way to banks, right, so on and so forth. Right now we're just growing our team. We've been pretty cash positive recently, so it's been pretty nice. And just been growing.
Great. Can you walk me through what a typical day in the life looks like as the founder and CEO?
It's different every single day. We would wake up, we would go to the office, and then we would go back home pretty late. But I'd say, probably wake up at around 7ish, and then our office is down near Salesforce, so we would come down here, and then we would probably leave around and then do a lot of work. I guess there's a lot of different moving pieces, right? Either it's product engineering, hiring, right, a bunch of different things, and then we would probably go out at maybe 9 back to the house and stuff like that. So it's that's
Everybody's
usually
busy.
what the day looks like.
Yeah. So rewinding a bit to your early spark, can you tell me about your first experiences with entrepreneurship and how you got involved with all of this in the first place?
Yeah, I think my first kind of experiences was I got really lucky during quarantine. So I met the right people at the right time. Back, I think, in 2020. So this was when San Francisco was a Discord server. And I think I was in middle school back then. So I just meet all these people. A lot of them actually are pretty famous in tech nowadays. And back then, they weren't as big. And you would see all these different people, and they're all building really cool stuff. And I was like, holy shit, how can I kind of be something around there? So that's kind of how I got into everything. Was just I saw really impressive people. San Francisco was kind of like a Discord server, and I'd try to get jobs at these companies and stuff like that. And then I guess kind of went down the rabbit hole of building companies. So
When you say San Francisco was like a Discord server, how did you go from being like a 12, 13-year-old and joining one of these Discord servers with these Silicon Valley elites?
I think it was kind of. There's one point where it's age is somewhat of leverage, right? Where if you're under a specific age, people would find it impressive. Back then I was 13, right? And even 16, 17 felt really young to them, but 13 was really, really young, and that was in high school, or actually freshman year of high school. So they just got really interested, I guess, naturally, right? It's what is this 13-year-old doing here? And then once you talk to them more and learn a lot of the stuff from them, you could kind of, I guess, use that as it's like lowest hanging fruit to kind of start conversations and get into things. I think as like time goes on, it's like you could use that for so long until you have to actually build confidence. So I think a big factor of it was kind of age initially.
Definitely. What do you think was your first proper entrepreneurial experience? You know, you were part of these Discord servers. What was the first thing you did that really set things off?
I used to. So what I ended up doing back then was I found out that people in San Francisco would put crazy amounts of money for really simple stuff, right? So you had all these companies. This was back in 2021. It was like the ZERP, which is like zero interest rate kind of time, where people would put crazy amounts of money for very, very, I guess, simple things, or there was a lot of money going around, a lot of money circulating. And so what ended up happening was I found that a lot of tech people, they really needed things done fast. So initially what I ended up doing was we kind of ran this like outsourcing shop where we would basically get tasks from the Discord server where there would be a lot of people paying for a lot of very simple stuff. We would basically get tasks and then they would give it to us and we would brand ourselves as like this, individual, like really good software developer. And what we would do is we would outsource a task they gave to us to someone from outside of the US, and then we would just basically like arbitrage it. But it was kind of interesting back in the day. And then I ended up meeting this guy named Scott. So he started this company called Carbon Zero. And instead of like, initially we were like, okay, we're going to outsource some stuff, so on and so forth, we're going to figure out from there. But initially, eventually what it kind of ended up into was I ended up working for him at a company called Carbon Zero. And he taught me a lot about, the cycles of the company, when it was growing, when it was different challenges that you go through, right, stuff like that. And that was pretty much like I think the first company that really worked at. And I learned a ton. Scott, like to this day too, is still like a really close mentor, right, and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into like some of the startups.
That's awesome. So Carbon Zero, did it get acquired or how did you
exit?
It
got acquired. So it was this like climate credit card where basically you would count your carbon footprint as how you would count your calories, right? Where there was this time where there was a lot of carbon conscious people, where a good amount of people cared so much about the environment, right, that they were trying to track, and it was actually surprisingly a massive market. Back when ESG was still a thing. Now it's 2025, but this is 2021. Back when ESG was really big, Greta Thunberg was very, very popular. And yeah, like it was just people wanted to count. People wanted to emit less carbon. People wanted to go carbon neutral. So why not have like your credit card, basically your credit card spend, it correlates to the amount of carbon you're emitting. You go to Chipotle, right? The kind of distance from your house to Chipotle, right? And then also the different things you get within your bowl actually emits carbon. So you could sort of minimize that with some of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that was something that speaks to what the climate was like back in 2020, right? With like ESG and everything.
Yeah, I mean, like now it would definitely not work, right? Just because I guess you can't really predicate. I mean, there's like $1 billion company called Aspiration that did something similar, but it's just something that would have never worked now, right? And stuff like that.
Did you join Carbon Zero as an intern or like were you part of their team? What did that look like?
I joined as a part of their team. I think I was like really a really early hire. It was a really small team back then. And I was there for like around, I think a year or something like that. And then they ended up getting sold.
That's awesome.
We were basically, I guess how it was like structured too was, I kind of was like this chief of staff and like helping growth, right, and stuff like that. So, I basically worked really closely with the founder and we, I did a lot of their tasks as of like growth and stuff like that. And that's also like one of the early like exposures when it comes to like marketing, right? Initially early on is like, how can you actually do marketing at like a really broad scale and also target the right people at the right time, and how can you pull insane stunts? So we would do like a lot of these ad campaigns and stuff like that, and figure out how to kind of think around these things. And a lot of this stuff is actually correlated to some of the stuff that I do today, which is how can you acquire a bunch of different customers? How can you work with these customers? How can you speed up iteration cycle, right? So on and so forth.
Yeah. So after Carbon Zero, what other ventures or like experiences did you go through before you ended up building Aviato?
Yeah, so I've been building Aviato for 4 years, so it's been a really long time. It was a very
Yeah.
different product than how we initially started.
Hmm.
After that, I started this company with a couple of friends. It was basically like this thing where we're doing an announcement board for schools. It was a hard business, especially in the
Yeah.
schools, right? I think one of the biggest things we kind of learned is like you want to sell people with money. If you like I think I made this comparison earlier, which is like with markets. Every single market is pretty much or think of every single company as you're a group of people trying to dig for gold. If there's no gold in a mine, no matter how good your team is, you're never going to dig any gold. But
Yeah.
even if your team is somewhat okay, right, and there's a mine full of gold in like a very growing industry or a very massive industry, then you're going to be able to get a good percent of it, right? So you can't really sell to a brick wall, and I think that's what we were doing with building EdTech. Was that we were kind of selling to a brick wall, which the sales cycles were way too long. It would take them like a year or 2 years, right? There were a lot of challenges, but we ended up getting a good amount of users, and then we sold that, I think, 4 years ago now. And then after that, I started this company called Aviato, which is what I'm working on now. And initially, we started as this SMB database for private equity firms, right? So initially, like I was reading a lot of different things. And basically, a lot of small businesses were getting bought out by private equity firms and roll-ups. So they would acquire like 5, 10 different a lot of weird businesses, right? So like think about like private equity coming into your neighborhood and buying out a lot of car washes, a lot of washing machines, a lot of laundromats, right? So on and so forth. So initially, we were like, okay, these properties or these businesses were underpriced. No one knew how to price them, and actually a lot of the companies that were selling had a large appearance on the internet. When they're selling, the revenue data is on there, so on and so forth. So we ended up building this database and selling to private equity firms, and that didn't really work out just because the private equity firms had people on site to survey, and then also you can't really sell to the mid-market, right? So you ended up having the same problem where you're selling to people that didn't have money, which is the individual buyers. So we ended up pivoting using a lot of the data models into private market data, and then that ended up working decently well. We initially were this VC platform. VC market was a little bit too small, and then we ended up pivoting to more of like a general kind of like a data engine, right, for a lot of like B2B tools, and then that ended up working out. So.
Awesome. So how late in building this private equity tool did you, how late in that process did you pivot into what you're doing now?
I think, a couple of months, right?
Okay.
Which is, I think it was like 6 months or something like that. Where it's you don't want to dig yourself into a deeper hole, right? Once you find out something's not working, you want to iterate as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And the thing with pivoting is like pivoting sometimes works where it's like pivoting 180 degrees. There's two types of pivot. There's a 180-degree pivot, and then there's a 360-degree pivot. A 180-degree pivot is when you pivot to like a very adjacent industry, right? Or a very adjacent thing, like, hey, I want to build something else in private equity. And then a 360 pivot is you're building for a whole different market, right? Like if you pivot from building for private equity firms to like banks, right? Or if you pivot from private equity firms to a whole different market. And most of the times, 360 pivots work a lot better than 180 pivots, where you actually have to sit on the drawing board and you're like, hey, what new idea can I actually do, right? Well, once you find out like a business isn't working, you have to be pretty reactive to that. Instead of digging yourself in a deeper hole, if that kind of makes sense, right? So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think something that's pretty impressive about you, in addition to everything else, is how you're able to build your team, right? So how did you find these people? How did you recruit them, convince you to join your team, especially people who are older than you?
I think you kind of have to sell a vision. People like to back ambitious stuff. Or people like to back ambitious, but also kind of realistic visions, right? If you tell and I think a big part is ideas, right? For example, if you tell someone, hey, we're just building this sourcing tool for VCs, you're not going to attract the best talent because the best talent won't want to work for you because you have a very, very small vision on where you want to go. Yep. But let's just say, you notice this opportunity that most people don't realize. Like, hey, I'm going to not just build a data engine for VCs, but I want to build a massive record for everyone on Earth, right? Where a lot of these agent companies, they need more context. And the problem is no one has enough context. Not even the government. The government doesn't have real-time data sets. They have like social security and all these different things, but these are like kind of system of records, right? You kind of need a lot of metadata in order to do that. And the only people with metadata is actually these companies like Google or Amazon or Meta, where you actually are very integrated into their lives. Where if you ask Google, like, hey, what's Philip's date of birth? What's his recent searches? What is he interested in? Google has that, but the government doesn't. And we basically figured out a way to get the same kind of data as like a Google or Meta in the world, and basically be able to use that and process the data and build a lot of really cool technology on top of that. And so I think that kind of drives a lot of people where it's like, hey, we're not building like a sourcing tool where we want to put everyone into this massive centralized database and be able to have a lot of the metadata on top of it. And that was like a more ambitious vision than venture tools and stuff like that, or anything else out there. And you get really, really great people to kind of work on it. And I think people are naturally driven by really cool or really big ideas, right? Saying that you're building flying cars is a lot more interesting than building a CRM, right, or something like that, or like an enterprise software tool. And I think that's a big part. And then also too, it's like, how can you actually have a lot of really great people working for you? It's like kind of like this chicken or egg problem where it's like you need good people to be working with you to attract really good talent. And so how can you get the really good talent initially? And so that was like an initial problem too that you kind of have to like figure out. And it's like you also build respect with your whole entire team while building a lot of really good culture. And so we had a lot of like different cycles of that while building the business.
I see, for sure. I know your COO is pretty experienced. He's been in the game for a long time, right? And your CTO as well. Like,
I mean, it's I think one of the biggest things that I've learned in hiring is like you never want to hire for optics. Where a lot of people are like, hey, this is this person, he's been in the game for like 20 years, 30 years, right? He's had his credentials X and Y. At the end of the day, these are honestly useless. I think the most underpriced talent out there are people that most people don't know that are really smart. Like a lot of engineers, right, are incredibly shit at interviews. They can't get a job anywhere, but they're really, really good. And so how can you find these people? And then also how can you find, like we hired a couple, like I feel like a lot of our high school engineers are a lot better than people that we hired that are a lot older. And the reason for that is because like if you started coding when you were 7, right? And you're on to now, like they're probably going to be at OpenAI or like a massive company one day, but you're kind of sniping them at the high school, college level before they end up being, the good engineer that they are, right? Versus like a lot of the older people where they like on paper they look better, but practically though, they have like less skill, right? So it's like kind of like this meritocracy, like how can you actually build a hiring structure where it's not just like optically good, but also like there's some meritocracy involved where it's not about how well you communicate and stuff like that. Your job is also you have to build culture fits, right? So assuming that they're a culture fit, you have to just find the best talents all around and sell a vision and then get everyone to sort of go on it. And then I think there's find underpriced talent, not kind of pre-existing talent that's already has a lot of exposure.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. I think just to confirm, so your target customer is VCs, right, and like other firms like that.
Not really VCs. So we basically work with anyone that needs data. So people like banks, people like HR platforms. We also power a lot of the VC platforms out there. Right. So you could actually see some of our use cases of our data. Like for example, we actually recently launched this thing where it's ranking Stanford students. So
I've seen it linked, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, which is like a hot or not for Stanford students. So it's basically like instead of like the hot or not, which is Zuck's app on rating girls, it's the incel version of it, which is rating guys or anyone based on their credentials or their resume. So that was something that was cool. That was powered by us. We also powered another platform pretty recently where it shows like, oh, people are leaving from OpenAI and going to like X or Y company. Those are some of our other use cases. And then we have a lot of like recruiting platforms, a lot of like enterprise platforms. So anyone that needs data out there, and then also some like agent companies too.
Yeah. Can you walk me through how you got your first customers, how you got that first early traction for your idea?
Yeah, I think initially it's really hard getting people to pay for your product, right? It's really easy to get people to try your product, but really hard for people to pull their wallets out and give you their credit card information.
Yeah.
Um, I we had a lot of, I guess, well, the customers that we were targeting, right, were bigger customers. So one of the biggest things that we did was we tried to look a lot bigger than we actually were. So we would basically have like, say, hey, we have like this approval structure or that approval structure. We have this sales guy and that sales guy. So we just like look like a really massive organization initially to get users to look really legitimate, so on and so forth. I think initial iterations, like I would just show up in the bathroom and this was like 2 years ago. I would show up in the bathroom. I would like take these calls. And I would do sales calls in the bathroom, and they're like, "Oh, this is like the most interesting sales call I've ever taken," right? And there's like the shock factor part of it. But I think as time goes on, it's just like, okay, how can you actually prove that your product's competent and solves a need? I think most people have this problem where like they try to perfect their product until it's actually perfect, but that just never really works, right? So I think it's just getting your hands on customers, iterating. Even the first design partners, always make them pay because they have more incentive, right? Even if it's a very menial amount, they're still paying for the product. And they basically use that to work with them, kind of be their internal data team, and like do things that don't really scale, and just follow up with them every single day, talk to them every single day, to figure out what their experience is, and then how can you actually always improve, continuously improve their user experience.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you've raised $2.3 million, right, at 17 years old. So can you walk me through your approach to securing this funding? And I know it's probably similar to how you got people with your recruitment, right? But like, how did you convince investors to back your vision?
Yeah, I think so we didn't end up raising that much because we didn't need, honestly, it's like the rule of thumb is like raising money is like kind of like debt, right? You're kind of doing the same thing, and you're taking a more expensive version of debt, which the money could fluctuate, right? Where if you take if you take loans, right, you get $1, maybe you get like a small interest rate back. It is not as high as giving a percent of your company, because that percent of your company could easily be worth a lot more than the initial money that's there. And you have like really insane valuations too, where like a lot of companies are overvalued. So we actually raised not too much, but we had a lot of really great people, right? So we had like a lot of really great funds that invested and stuff like that, kind of like somewhat like value add funds where they help us with customers, help us with business direction, so on and so forth. But yeah, I guess more of like, well, there's like a couple of factors. It was one, we had this ambitious vision. It was also two, calling from the high school bathroom, where they, it kind of made a good story where it's like, oh, I think one of the biggest questions someone will ask is, you're like 13 or 14, right? You're going to school, you're going to go to college. How are you going to commit to this business? You show up in the bathroom, they don't have any questions about that, because they know like you're going to go out of class to take the calls or to work on your business while you're doing that. And then I think the second, just like selling a vision, right? I don't think investors is that hard. You could raise money for pretty much anything out there if you're looped in, if you know the right people, so on and so forth. I think the biggest thing is like, how can you actually turn this in business? Because your goal as a business isn't to speculate on your assets, right? It's not like it's not like you can't speculate on shit, but also you can't really turn your thing into like a speculation game where it's like, oh, I could get this price per share to X amount, right, so on and so forth. You're not a SMAC. You're not a SMAC. You're not a SPAC. You're not a meme stock, right? You're not a meme coin. Your goal is to be a business, and in order to be a business, you have to make somewhat money, or some money, unless you're like doing new markets, which is like, for example, if you're trying to get the woolly mammoths back on Earth, right? Which like eventually this would be like a really like eventually these are like going to be great businesses one day. But currently, it's like, how can you actually focus on doing well for your customers, making your customers happy, setting up a really good cycle, right, and stuff like that, and solve an actual problem in the world that people need things. And so I think that's like the biggest thing that we spent a lot of time on. Like, we're pretty cash positive overall, and like how much money we're making versus how much we raised, right, so on and so forth. So.
I'm curious, do you think your age has been more of an advantage or like a barrier for you?
I think it really depends on what you're doing with. For example, if you're pitching to investors, age I think definitely helped a lot. where I think the younger you are, the kind of more shock factor there is, right? And people that you're raising money really like that. Customers somewhat, right? They're like, oh, is this like actually a joke? Is this actually building business, right? So on and so forth. I think the age kind of lowers the bar, where like they have less expectations, right? And if you're able to prove your competence, that really blows their mind. For example, like if you go to someone and you're like, hey, I'm like 13, right? Their bar immediately drops. You're like, oh, this is like a kid from high school, freshman year of high school, like what can they do? And if you really and if you show the same level of competence as like someone that's like actually building a business, like in their 20s or something like that, that really like that marginal or like that drastic difference from like, oh, their bar was dropped to when you're 13, but you really impressed them with the like average median, it's a lot more impressive, right? Which kind of shocks them. So it does work to a certain extent, but also you have to be competent in order to use like some of the low hanging fruit.
Definitely. Another thing you're kind of known for is your social media marketing, right? Your viral marketing, how you're able to get your posts about your dad, your parents, like wishing you were a doctor and stuff like that. Can you walk me through how you do that, and also what's the reason for it? Like, how has it helped you?
I think it's there's just something we kind of built, which is something called the viral machine. So how it works is there's like a couple of different distributors that would go viral, right? There's like three things that would go viral. It's either something funny, something controversial, something out of context. You tie them all together, you make a really, really good kind of like headline. And with these headlines, it turns into things which, it sounds cringe, but it's called memes. And memes are actually the best form of distribution because they're the only things that people share to one person, that shares to two people, that shares to three people. That's how you kind of have this mimetic theory, which is another for like virality, right? And it's like, how can you create that sense of virality? Well, you have to have a really good headline, and then you have to like iterate from that. For example, raising money from the high school bathroom is a very shocking factor. It's also a little bit controversial, right? You A/B test the title and so on and so forth. You basically make a really, really good news headline or a really good story. With the tweets, I think it was kind of interesting, where it's like, a large scale where you actually, a lot of it's really engineered, even though those are things that happen. For example, things where so sometimes like, people would basically like, come in hotbox in my high school bathroom, right? Or like there's like drug dealers in the bathroom, or my parents like wishing that, it wasn't my parents wishing medical school. Actually, my parents sent me that text where they wished that, they were like, oh, this would help you with your college applications. That was, it was like overall like kind of engineered when it went like viral, but it's also like stuff that were really true, right? Like these are like actual texts that my mom sent me that, well, they were a lot longer, but we just like edited to be on socials. But those are like actual stuff that happened. And you're kind of like, I kind of like victim to circumstance where these things just happen, and then it just ended up making really good content, right? So,
Yeah.
But then as like these went viral, it's like, okay, how can you break it down and how can you go viral over and over again? And that's something that we've been doing pretty well. But as of like customers, I feel like most of our customers are like a lot older, like a lot bigger organizations, so they don't really see the bathroom stuff. So actually, like sometimes they mention it, they're like, oh, you're like the bathroom kid. But I think eventually it's just it doesn't really help that much for enterprise. To be honest, like they recognize you, but it's not going to be a part of their decision.
So it's mainly for your own like personal branding and getting your name out there.
I think it kind of ends to be like in personal branding, but also like for marketing for like the company. We do a lot of different stuff, right? So a lot more boring, but a lot of like how can you like market an enterprise software company as like a consumer company, right? Like we took some customers skydiving, and that worked really well with some of the crowds, right? Or like we would do like product launches, and that works somewhat well too with some of our customers.
Yeah, so with this like skydiving and like the different event, like I know you did paintball, a few other events, right? So how has that been beneficial to you, and how have you been like establishing this community in SF for your customers, and also like
So we actually aren't establishing a community in SF because I think communities like happy hours, like people that go to happy hours are generally lower quality. We just literally take some of our customers plus some people for vibes, right? So like we would basically take like 5, like 2, 3, 4 customers onto like a trip where it's like really interesting. Like it sounds insane, like skydiving or like shark diving, right? Stuff like that. And we would just basically take them, we would hang out with them for the day, and actually it ends up being pretty cash positive because we would spend like probably $5,000 to $10,000 for an event, and then the money we would make out of it was probably like $100,000, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of worthwhile. So yeah, we would basically just like do these things and so something for our users, right? Know them a lot better, and then kind of build. I think a lot of building business or building companies is relationship based. If we can build a good relationship with most of the people, I think that's where things get interesting.
Do you have any suggestions on how to build strong relationships while you're building your startup?
I think a lot of people like reference like that is like kind of networking, right? A lot of people like are like, oh, I want to network with X amount of people every single day, but it just doesn't really work that way. Where it's like, I guess a lot of relationships, it's like how you build relationships with your friends at school, right? It's not really transactional. It's something that you guys really like each other, and like later down the line, it's not like someone that you would network with on like the street that you're like, oh, I'm gonna exchange contacts with you, and like, hey, I'm gonna sell you this later on. It's more of like, okay, you're more likely to sell things, or you're more likely to work together with your friends, right? Like let's just say you and your friends build companies. You're more likely to sell to each other than sell to like some random person that you met at a networking party. Or like a dinner, right? So like build like authentic relationships with a lot of people, and that's worked with us really well, especially with our customers.
For sure. Zach also touched a bit on this. It's like being genuine, right? Being authentic and actually following up with people and putting yourself out there in a way that doesn't seem inauthentic.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
I think authenticity is pretty important. A lot of people really value authenticity.
Yeah. Do you think you faced any like unique challenges because you were so young? Like some of the founders I've talked to have said like because they're like one of them grew out their beard so they would appear older, right? Has there been any Anchor? He's one of the co-founders of Bordy.
Oh yeah, I love
Yeah.
Bordy. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said he grew out his beard because he just wanted to appear older and he wouldn't experience as much like age discrimination, right? So is that something that's been a parallel for you?
See, the problem is like I'm Asian, so I can't really grow facial hair.
Yeah.
Hopefully all Asians look the same, right? So like if you're like 5 and you're like like 15, 20. Actually no, there's a difference between 5 and 15. But like if you're like 15 and like 20, like you can't really tell the difference because you're Asian. So I feel like as like a given, like I don't look too young. Also like building companies really ages you, right? Like it makes you look a lot older.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I think it kind of works like to take you seriously, but honestly, it's like as long as you're competent, people think you're fine.
Yeah. Have you ever considered, joining an incubator or an accelerator like YC? Is that even beneficial for you at this stage in your business?
YC would probably not. I mean, because like YC is tailored to like new founders, right? It's like people that are out of college, like building
very early
companies,
stage,
and stuff like that. Like for example, if I don't have trouble raising money and like I know kind of like, and I have the right network of like people and stuff like that, don't really need that much of a community anymore. Or like I already know enough people where I could like sort of like put things together. I don't think you would need YC, but I mean eventually like for maybe my next company or something like that, maybe go through YC. But yeah, we'll see. I guess yeah, just like there's a lot of good accelerators out there nowadays. So I think kind of a lot of great companies now.
Mm-hmm. What's your secret to standing out in this competitive atmosphere? I know like you have PitchBook, you have like Crunchbase, a lot of these competitors, right? How are you differentiating your offering?
We actually don't compete with PitchBook or Crunchbase. PitchBook and Crunchbase would actually kind of be in our customer category because we would provide data for them. They're not customers right now, but I'd say they're like probably like we basically let all of them compete with each other. I think it's kind of like this case where there's just a new HR platform or a new recruiting platform that comes out every single day that's like trying to build like AI tools around recruiting or sourcing. So we will actually compete with these like really competitive markets because we basically are this friendly provider that provides to all the people that compete with each other. So everyone that's dogfighting with each other, we give data to. So that's kind of how the business works.
Gotcha. So moving on to like looking ahead, right? Where do you see yourself going in the next like 3 to 5 years?
Honestly, it's hard to speculate because like I mean I don't even know what I'm gonna wear tomorrow, right? So it's quite hard. But honestly, it's like, yeah, like general direction is like, okay, like figure out what you actually want to do, right? Like, do you want to build a company? Like, things are very, very different. Like, I haven't been doing this for like more than like 4 or 5 years, right? So,
Yeah.
like 5 years from now could be very different. So, like, I could be doing something else. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. So it's kind of like, okay, right now, like the immediate goal is just, okay, how can you build this as big as you can, while like aligning with
Definitely.
like some of your personal philosophies.
Yeah. Have you set any personal goals for yourself beyond the business?
Personal goals. I think there's a couple. I mean, one, definitely go to the gym a lot more.
Yeah.
So eating healthier, getting the protein intake in. I also would, yeah, I also would, yeah, like be more technical, right? I think that's like one of the things. Like I want to learn. I want to learn more stuff. And then also like I actually want to sit my ass down and learn like math and like physics and all these different things because I kind of
Mhm.
feel like I kind of missed this a little bit in high school. And then also I've been getting into reading too, so like philosophy and all these different things. I think are really interesting. I guess like liberal arts. So I've been reading a lot of these books too, which is pretty nice.
I'm curious, like, why would what's the appeal in learning like math, physics, like diving back into like school subjects?
No, I feel like I just spent so much time in the bathroom where it's like I didn't actually go to school.
Mm,
And so I think it's like back then it wasn't like a practical implementation of it, right? Where it's like you don't actually know where you're doing it, but now you know why
yeah.
you're doing it. Like you kind of, and this is where like education kind of needs like to shift a little bit, where it's like you have no incentive to learn calculus because you're never going to do anything with it. But for example, if you're building like really really cool robots and stuff like that, you need to learn that. Same with like physics, right, and all these different things. If you're trying to figure out how to move robot arms, right, or like how X or Y works, you need stuff like that. And so that's like the big incentive to kind of go back and learn more. And then I think philosophy too is like understanding more of like the frameworks of how the world works, right, and how the world operates. And those are things that you definitely want. Like there's like one thing about like being wealthy, but also another thing about being well-rounded, right? Where
Yeah.
I think being well-rounded goes a lot further than kind of money and having like a philosophy of like where you actually want to end up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. On to our final section, which is advice in closing. Like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a teenager who wants to make a startup tomorrow?
Say high schoolers shouldn't build companies. I don't think people in high school should build companies, honestly. I think you like look at it, like when was the last time you've seen a successful high school entrepreneur, right? There
Mm,
has not been a successful high school entrepreneur yet. I think most of the people that do really well are in college or post-college. I think like optimize, learn stuff, I guess, get experience. You shouldn't start a company just for the sake of starting a company. You should like honestly work at a company, work at a fast-growing company, right? And then start a company later on. And I think there's, yeah, like I think ambition is good, right? But also, yeah, like I think two like general things, just like one, build relationships, don't be transactional, and also two, like learn as much, get really well rounded. Like high school is the only time in life where you actually could sit down and learn a bunch of different things at once, right? You could learn philosophy, you could learn math, you could learn all these different things, and you could get so well rounded. Like building a company, you could build it whenever, right? But you won't get that time when you're like over 18 or in college or stuff like that, just because things are very, very different. And high school is just such a good period of time where we could actually dive into things.
yeah.
And that's what I'd probably spend high school doing. And then maybe
Really,
something later.
that's so interesting coming from you, as like the successful high school entrepreneur who made it out, right?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say successful. I mean, there's a lot of like I have a lot of buddies, and we talk about this all the time, where it's like, they're like even though it's like great, like oh you're making a lot of money, you're kind of building businesses, right? And it's really cool. It's like also like we also want to be more well-rounded, which is like we want to actually learn a lot of this stuff and actually go heads down and kind of wish like we took high school like more seriously, right, and stuff like that, or like learning more seriously. And I think it's like your career is like a really really long time, right? Like your career is probably like 40, 50 years,
Mhm.
and you can't peak right now. If you peak right now, it's gonna be really boring
Yeah.
because so you have to constantly iterate, right? And yeah, I think having more knowledge and knowing a lot more stuff is going to help you iterate more because you have more options and you have this framework of how you do things.
Yeah, then in that case, like, are there any specific skills or subjects or experiences that you wish you could learn right now? Like, if you could just snap your fingers, you got it, right? Like, what are those things that you wish you had done in high school and that would help you now?
I wish I have Neuralink now, but like I guess primarily it's like I mean one of the things is like philosophy, right? Like to like read a whole book is takes a long time, and especially when you're working all the time, it's really hard to read a whole book, or like explore a bunch of different things, right? So like for example, if you're reading like a lot of like philosophy and how people think about the world or the greatest like thinkers, right? It's generally just generally takes a lot more time, and that's something I wish I started a lot earlier. I think same with like paying attention to math and like having the frameworks like to learn, right? And doing that, and now I'm like doing that all now, right? So
Yeah. If you could go back to your 14-year-old, 13-year-old self, what would you tell them to do different? Or you don't have to tell them to do anything different at all, but what are things that you wish like you knew back then?
I think back then, I think there's probably a lot of things I would have told it. There's I guess actually the biggest lesson that I've probably learned is ego, right? Where there's a very thin line between ego and arrogance, and people like to work with great people, but not obnoxious people. I think really early on, right? I think I was incredibly immature, right? Burned a lot of bridges, especially in the early days, where like I think a lot of people, right, when they have a lot of success really early on, they have a really big ego. And then, I mean, once you come to San Francisco, you kind of have this ego death because then you realize, oh, like you're really dumb, like everyone else is like really smart, right? But people here are incredibly smart. But you kind of have this like, I guess maybe like ego death, but also like keep ego low, be a really good person, I guess. Learn as much as you can, and definitely listen to other people, right? Or like take advice from like an aggregate amount of people, not just from one person, but an aggregate amount, if it's like qualitative. And I think, I guess really just like be heads down, be low key, right? And just build cool stuff. And those are like probably the biggest things.
Cool. Do you have any final thoughts or words of encouragement for aspiring young founders?
Where's the encouragement? I think like just build cool stuff, and then I think a lot of people get distracted by the really shiny stuff, right? Like press. I mean, it's nice to like have people like notice you for the stuff that you've done. Like there's like this shiny object syndrome where it's like, oh, you're on this article, you're on that article. But at the end of the day, it's like media and all these different things are smokescreen. You actually don't know the things that people are doing in the background. And there's a lot of work that's being put into what's happening in the background. And so, like just don't get distracted by all the shiny stuff and actually build what's actually meaningful, which is, building, being heads down, building really cool stuff, experimenting with a bunch of different things, and then, maybe eventually turning into a company, right? But just build really cool stuff.
Great. All right. Yeah. I think that's it for the podcast. Thank you so much.
Awesome. But I appreciate you having us on. So it's definitely interesting. I wasn't working from home today, but Zach has his office down in the house. So I saw it. But yeah.